In January of 2000, a winter storm hit the Santa Monica Mountains harder than usual. By dawn, a section of Mulholland Drive had collapsed, taking down trees, power poles, and 50 feet of road. But what caught everyone's attention wasn't the mud or the damage. It was the glint of red steel buried deep in the hillside. At first, it looked like a rusted pipe. But by noon, the LAPD was on scene. And by nightfall, I knew this wasn't just a car wreck. It was a grave. Before we start, hit subscribe to help uncover stories they tried to bury, and make sure no name stays forgotten. My name's Zoe Fair. I was 30 years old back then, just promoted into major crimes out of Central Division. Grew up in the valley, raised by my grandmother. My mother, well, I was told she died when I was a baby. No one ever said much beyond that. I didn't press it. I had a quiet routine, morning runs, coffee by 6 uniform, pressed and ready by 6:15. I liked things that made sense. January 8th started like any other. Then the call came through. A red Ferrari, half buried in a slide near Coldwater Canyon. It wasn't just the car, it was what was found next to it. When I got there, the backhoe had already stopped. The operator was off to the side, pale and shaky. I walked to the edge of the slope and looked down. The Ferrari was nose first in the earth, tilted like it had fallen from the sky. The paint was mottled, chipped through with rust, but it still held a kind of presence, like it had been waiting to be found. There was fabric near the front bumper, red satin, shredded and stained. Just beneath it, we saw what looked like an arm. Not attached to the car, not buried deep enough to be forgotten. By noon, the coroner's van had arrived. The remains were partial, mostly upper torso fragments of the jaw, both arms. No purse, no ID, no wallet. But something about the scene told me it wasn't random. The robe was still draped around the bones like someone had placed it there. And the car. No skid marks, no crash trail. It had been buried on purpose. We pulled a partial VIN from under the dashboard and I sent it in. Then I went home and waited. That evening, just after 10, the call came from the coroner's office. They'd matched the dental records. The voice on the line said, "It's her, Lana Fair." I stood there in my apartment file, still open, coffee cold. The name didn't feel real at first. Not the woman from the silver screen, the one whose face I'd seen 100 times in old film clips. But she was real. And she had just gone from missing person to homicide. By the next morning, the case had gone public. I didn't even have time to breathe before the headlines hit. Lana found, Mulholland mystery reignites Hollywood legend. There was pressure from every angle. News crews, radio hosts, morning shows asking why now, why here. But all I could think about was how quiet that hillside had been, like it had been keeping her secret for a very long time. I didn't know it yet, but this case would touch every corner of my life. It would break things I didn't even know were fragile. And it started with one question that still won't leave me. Why had no one ever come looking for her? I didn't sleep much that night. After the ID came back, everything around me kept moving, traffic phones, press calls, but my mind just stopped at her name. Lana Fair. I'd seen her face before, of course. You couldn't grow up in California without catching glimpses, late-night reruns, film festival clips, old interviews played for nostalgia's sake. But now that name was on my desk, and her body was in the coroner's lab. That morning, I drove into the precinct before sunrise. The building still smelled like floor wax and burnt coffee. Inside, it was already chaos. The image on the front page of the Los Angeles Herald was everywhere. Lana mid-laugh leaning against a red convertible. The headline read, "Lana found. Mulholland mystery. Ignites Hollywood legend. Someone had leaked it. Maybe a forensics intern, maybe a cleanup crew member. It didn't matter. The press had it. And by noon, every outlet in LA was buzzing. Radio stations played old audio from her films. Talk shows speculated. Suicide overdose escape. They couldn't decide if she was a tragedy or a scandal. The captain called it a media freeze. From here on out, it was sealed. Homicide investigation. No public statements. I welcomed the quiet. If Lana Fair had been buried deliberately, I didn't want whoever did it to know we were catching up. That afternoon, I drove across town to the Los Angeles Times archives. I had called ahead and asked for Gideon Arnett. He was a retired entertainment columnist, mostly forgotten except by old-timers. When I mentioned Lana's name, though, his tone changed. He met me in a storage room stacked with yellowed files and black plastic crates. He looked like time had dragged him slowly. Thin face, pale skin, but his eyes still had some light. She was lightning in a bottle, he told me, pouring 2 cups of instant coffee that smelled more like cardboard than caffeine. She knew how to play the game, until the game turned on her. He handed me a manila folder thick with clippings, headlines, gossip, candid photos from parties and premieres. Through them all, one name came up over and over again, Vincent Varna. I asked about the months before she vanished. Gideon pulled out a VHS tape. The case was cracked, but the label was still clear. May 1978 interview, Lana Fair. "You'll want to watch this one," he said. I thanked him and brought it home that night. I didn't own a VCR, so I borrowed one from evidence downstairs. Sat on the floor in front of the TV with my notepad watching the tape play out like it was trying to remember something. Lana was poised, elegant. Her voice was steady, her smile soft. She joked with the host, talked about Broadway childhood memories, plans for her next film. Nothing in her tone suggested fear, no mention of depression, no erratic behavior. If anything, she looked ready, like someone who had more to say. The second time I watched, I slowed it down, studied her eyes. There was something in them, not panic, but caution. Guarded, like she was holding something just out of reach. That's when the hair sample came back from the robe. It didn't match Lana. The DNA was male medium-length dark hair, not in any database, no criminal record, no military, no hospital. Either the man had never been booked, or someone had scrubbed the files. If it wasn't hers, then whoever had been with her when she died, whether they helped her or killed her, had been close enough to leave it behind. Over the next few days, I read everything I could. Archived interviews, tabloid pieces, film festival programs. In 1976, Lana had walked away from a major studio contract. She vanished to Palm Springs for almost a year. The press said she was in rehab. Others whispered she was pregnant. But when she came back in '78, she looked sharper than ever. Whatever she'd been through, she'd survived it. And that's what kept me locked in. She wasn't unraveling. She was preparing. One night, I stayed up watching one of her lesser-known films, The Clay Rose, from 1974. It was a period piece, heavy on monologues and dim lighting. Not really my style. But Lana, she made every silence feel deliberate. There's a line at the end, just before the credits roll. The truth doesn't go away just because you close your eyes. I don't know why, but it stayed with me. The next morning, we got a tip. An anonymous caller said there'd been a man seen off and on near Mulholland back in the late '70s. He'd park along the curves and sit with binoculars. Old truck. Same brown jacket every time. I traced the name to a duplex in Woodland Hills. The yard was overgrown. A white tarp flapped over the roof. The man who answered the door was Eddie Langford. 68, thin, yellow skin, limped from an old wreck. In '79, he'd served time for operating a stolen car ring near Laurel Canyon. I showed him a photo of Lana. He squinted. "That actress, right?" "Nah, never met her. Not in person." He agreed to give a statement. We ran his prints. Checked against the Ferrari. Nothing. Later, a court record came back he'd been incarcerated the entire summer of '78. The lead fell apart. 2 weeks passed. No new tips. No new evidence. Forensics came back with inconclusive cause of death. No blunt force trauma. No toxicology left to test. Could have been an accident, they said. Maybe she just... drove off the road and never made it out. The case stayed open, but officially we were pulling back. The file moved off the active board, just another cold name on the shelf. I didn't argue. I just stared at the photo still on my screen, the red dino half buried nose first in the dirt, like someone had tried to make her vanish and nearly succeeded. I started calling around old studios' retired crew lists, SAG records. Velmont Pictures came up. Lana had filmed 3 movies there. The place had changed hands, changed names. But the stories, they lingered. I reached out to anyone still living who'd worked with her. Most said the same thing: I don't remember much. Some hung up before I even got my name out. One woman did agree to meet me, Dolores Finch. Everyone called her Dolly. She'd worked as a hairdresser during Lana's final 2 years on contract. We sat in the back of a cluttered prop room, and she stirred powdered creamer into tea that smelled like glue. She was sweet, Dolly said, but something changed near the end. She got careful, wouldn't leave things in her dressing room, always checking her purse. I asked if Lana had ever said why. Dolly gave a half shrug, said she felt watched. But in this town, that's like saying it's sunny. Back at my apartment that night, I rewatched the May 1978 interview, not the aired version, the outtakes. There was a question about her last director. Her smile slipped just for a second. Then she said, "We had creative differences." It didn't sound like a joke. That phrase stuck. 2 days later, I tracked down a woman named Carla Price. She'd been a production assistant on Moon River Lana's last credited film before she disappeared. We met at a half-empty food court in Glendale. Carla was quiet, shoulders tense. "I thought she just ran," she said. "Everyone did." I asked what made her doubt that. Carla leaned forward. She was planning something. Not to run, to expose. I kept my pen still. She asked about lawyers. About dropping something on someone. Said she was tired of being watched, tired of being used. I asked if Lana ever said who. Carla shook her head. But before I left, she told me one last thing. She said if anything happened to her, the people at the top would bury it. And they'd bury her too. Later that night, I was back at my desk, staring at the evidence board. None of it made sense together. Not yet. Lana was at the center. Around her, just noise, rumors, silence, contradictions. Then the phone rang. The voice was low, gruff. Male. "I heard you're looking into Lana," he said. I was crew. Studio grip. "I know things." I asked his name. He ignored it. "Not important. I'll meet you tomorrow." Vista Theater Garage, 5 p.m. Don't bring anyone. Then he hung up. I stayed seated, phone still to my ear, heartbeat steady but rising. For the first time in weeks, someone out there wasn't just remembering. They were ready to talk. I got to the Vista Theater Garage 5 minutes early. The roof was mostly empty, just the buzz of distant traffic and the soft hum of the air vents along the side wall. I parked facing the edge and waited, hands still on the wheel. The man never showed. I stayed 20 minutes watching shadows stretch across the pavement as the sun dipped behind the hills. A few teenagers passed through, laughing too loud, unaware of the quiet weight that hung in that open space. I didn't call it in. I just drove home. The next morning, my desk phone rang before 9. Same voice, a little raspier this time, like he hadn't slept either. "Too many eyes," he said. "Sunland Diner, northwest corner booth, 10 sharp." Then he hung up. That was all I needed. I didn't ask permission. I got there early again. The diner was old linoleum cracked, coffee burnt, waitress polite but distracted. I took the booth near the back window and ordered a cup I had no intention of drinking. At exactly 10, he walked in. Faded jacket, weathered hands, beard trimmed short but going gray. He moved like a man used to lifting things quietly. He slid into the booth across from me, nodded once. "That was it. I was a dolly grip," he said. Velmont Studios. 2 pictures with Lana. I didn't interrupt. He wasn't telling me a story, he was unloading one. There was a shoot, he said after a pause. Wasn't for a film. Called it a wardrobe test, but it wasn't for costume. No script. No lighting team. Just a camera and a few names on a clipboard. He looked out the window like he was seeing it again. Girls were told they were up for something big. Lead roles, magazine features. But it was for leverage, for control. I didn't write. I just listened. Lana got hold of the contact sheets, he said. A stack of them. Other girls, other dates. She confronted him. Said she was going to blow it wide open. His voice lowered. She even laughed. Said, "Let's see if they put that in Variety." He reached into his jacket and slid a napkin across the table. An address. Burbank. Storage under Soundstage B. That's where they kept the real stuff, he said. Print vault. Negatives, reels, old tests. Junk the execs didn't want lying around. He didn't touch his coffee. Just stood, nodded again, and left the way he came. The address led to a low warehouse-style building with boarded windows and a padlocked side gate. It had once been part of a post-production suite now listed as pending development on the city register. No cameras. No security posted. I got inside through a rusted stairwell that led down behind the lot. The basement smelled like film chemicals and wet plaster. Filing cabinets had been pulled out, some still half open. Paper scraps were scattered across the concrete. Broken reel boxes, brittle labels, a coil of 35mm leader tape curled in the corner. Whoever had cleared it out hadn't done it cleanly, but they'd been fast. A cigarette butt lay near the back wall, still fresh. I took photos, logged what I could. Then I went back to the precinct and requested building records, tenant logs, recent patrol routes. Nothing showed. No maintenance entries. No security tapes. Either someone had scrubbed the files, or someone had access and didn't want a trail. I didn't go home that night until after 9. When I walked in, the house felt wrong, still but not empty. The front hallway was colder than usual. I flipped the light switch. Nothing. Then I called out quiet at first. Gran. No answer. I moved slowly down the hall. Her door was open just an inch. I pushed it wider, saw the cracked frame and the lamp tipped onto the rug. My eyes found the blood before they found her. One arm, pale, slumped behind the dresser. Her leg twisted awkwardly beneath her. I dropped to my knees. Gran. Her chest was still rising barely. I pressed my hands to her temple, tried to stop the bleeding. Called 911 with my free hand, kept whispering to her, "Stay with me. Please stay with me." Over and over. The EMTs came fast. I rode with her, gripping her hand. She never opened her eyes. They let me sit by her bedside for 2 hours while they ran tests, scans, stabilized what they could. The machines were steady, but her breathing was thin. Blood had dried at her temple, curled into her hairline. When her hand twitched in mine, I leaned closer. Her lips moved. A dry whisper. The box. In the floor. I swallowed hard. What box? Her voice was almost gone. Closet. Under the wood. Find it. I nodded. Okay. Just rest. We'll talk soon. But her gaze had already dulled. Her chest rose one more time and stopped. I didn't cry. Not then. I just sat with her. Let the silence take up space. I got back to the house after 2 in the morning. It still smelled like broken glass and blood. I went to her closet, moved the old shoe boxes, pressed along the floorboards. One of them gave slightly under my hand. I pried it up. Inside, wrapped in yellowing tape, was a shoebox. The lid had handwriting in faded ink for her. When she's ready. I sat there for a long time, just holding it. When I opened it, there was a letter, a necklace, and a photograph. The letter was written in a fast, slanted hand. It started with, "To my little girl." The photo was soft at the corners, taken indoors, light streaming through a window. A young woman sat on a couch, auburn hair tucked behind her ear. In her arms, wrapped in a pink blanket, was a newborn. Her face was tired but proud, and I knew her, not from memory, from film, from the case. It was Lana Fair. I looked at the baby again, then back at the note. If you're reading this, it means I didn't make it to tell you myself. The letter was careful. No names, no addresses, but clear. Lana had been pregnant. The man she once trusted had started watching her every move. She said she had photos, evidence, names. She tried to disappear, tried to protect her daughter by giving her up. That daughter was me. I sat on the closet floor and didn't move. All those years of wondering, the sideways glances, the questions no one would answer, they all landed in a single breath. The necklace in the box was delicate gold with a 5-pointed star. I held it next to the one we recovered from the burial site. Identical. Twin charms. One for her, one for me. When the grief dulled just enough to let me breathe again, I felt something else underneath it. Something harder, focused. I looked back at the last line of the letter. Don't let them bury me forever. I folded the paper, placed it back in the box, and zipped it into my bag. I didn't need to wonder who she meant anymore. I'd seen his name in the press clippings, heard it from old crew. The director who made her famous, Vincent Varna. I already knew where to find him. I didn't report back to the precinct right away. I drove slow and aimless through the side streets near Studio City until the traffic thinned out. I needed time to think without someone breathing over my shoulder, without the weight of protocol or questions I couldn't answer yet. Back at home, I placed the box on the kitchen counter and stood there for a long time. The photo of Lana holding me was still inside, curled at the edges, her expression calm but tired. I must have stared at it for 10 minutes, trying to decide if I looked more like her or the man she'd warned me about. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't turn on the TV or call anyone. I sat at the dining table going over everything: my notes, the coroner's file, the photos from the hillside. I laid them out like pieces of a puzzle I couldn't stop assembling, even if it never came together. Every now and then I'd reach for the necklace, the little gold star, and turn it over in my hand like maybe it would give me something more. By morning, I was back at my desk. I logged the break-in as an active case, but kept the details off the board. There was too much I wasn't ready to share. I still hadn't told anyone about the letter or the photo. That wasn't evidence, yet it was history. Mine. And I needed more than a whisper of a name before I dragged it into daylight. I went back through the original clippings, the ones Gideon had given me. There were mentions of Varna early in Lana's career, rumors of an off-camera relationship, the kind the tabloids never called what it really was. In those days, no one used words like coercion. If a director wanted you in the film and in his house, people just said you were lucky. I checked the old studio maps and maintenance records. Belmont Pictures still had a backlot office building tucked behind the main sound stages. The address hadn't changed, though the name on the door had. Varney Pictures, sleek lettering on brushed aluminum, minimalist logo, the kind of place that wanted to forget where it came from. The receptionist barely looked up when I flashed my badge. I told her we had a warrant already filed, already signed. Inside the space was cold, the kind of cold that tried to feel expensive. Framed posters on the walls, Varna's films from the early 80s, a courtroom drama from the 90s that had earned him critical praise, even a cable award. But no photos, no personal effects, nothing that showed who he really was. A forensic team was already working the main rooms, collecting drives and sweeping for prints. I kept my voice low and steady when I asked them to focus on the back hall. The edit bay was soundproofed, fluorescent lighting overhead dust on the floor. One of the techs knocked along the far wall, then paused. The sound changed hollow, dull. Found something, he said. It took 15 minutes to pry the panel open without damaging what was behind it. A narrow crawl space, dry but stale. Inside, 2 old storage bins, plastic lids cracked from time. The kind you'd use for film reels. Each one labeled with a Roman numeral. When they opened them, the room went still. Inside were negatives, dozens of them carefully sleeved, some labeled with first names, some with dates. Below that, 2 notebooks. Ledgers. Hardbound. Every page filled with names, numbers, and checks. There were job titles, too. Makeup wardrobe grip. And under one entry, Lana. FX. Silence. I didn't speak. I turned the page. More numbers. More initials. This wasn't about budgeting. This was bookkeeping for silence. For damage control. For what they thought they'd never have to answer for. I ordered the negatives sent to the Forensic Media Division. The ledgers went straight into evidence. I took the notebooks back to my desk where I sat for over an hour flipping through every name, every dollar amount, every scribbled note. Most were dated between 1974 and 1981, but some went later. That evening I stood behind the glass at the forensic lab as they laid the negatives across the light table. The red filter gave the room a surreal glow, like we were looking at something from another time that never quite let go. The technician walked me through each image. Most were stills posed awkward, some clearly taken without the women knowing. In some, the angles were low calculated, faces half shown or hidden. But one set stopped everything. Lana, sitting on a velvet stool wrapped in a silk robe that had slipped off one shoulder. In the edge of the frame, a man's hand adjusting something, maybe a light, maybe just pretending. Her face wasn't soft. Her mouth was open slightly mid-sentence, or maybe protest. Her eyes didn't look at the camera. They looked past it. At someone. In the next image, she stood in front of a painted backdrop. Same robe, loosely tied arms crossed over her chest. Her eyes were narrowed, fixed on something or someone outside the shot. There was one more envelope, labeled 1978 Promo Outtakes. Inside was a damaged reel of 16mm film. We threaded it through the projector and let it run. It was rough, the frame jumpy, audio distorted, but Lana's voice came through, clear enough to hold the room still. "They think they own us," she said. "I was 19 when it started. These men," she hesitated, then laughed once bitterly. "They've been pimping out girls like me since I was 19, and now that I've got proof." Then it cut to static. I don't remember what I said, if anything. I just stood there watching the screen go blank. The next morning, I laid out the evidence in front of the DA's office, negatives ledgers, contact sheets, audio transcripts. No theories, just facts. It was enough to open charges, coercion, unlawful surveillance, possibly conspiracy. And if we could tie it to Lana's death, we'd have homicide. They agreed. Quietly, grimly. The warrant was signed by noon. We moved on the house before sunrise the next day. A gated property in the hills' long driveway, cameras perched at every corner. But the house was still. Too still. Inside it looked like someone had packed in a hurry. Drawers open. Shelves half empty. A burner phone on the kitchen counter, its SIM pried loose. Upstairs, the bed was stripped. Luggage gone. Closet light still on. Passport drawer wide open. We were too late. I stood in the center of that cold living room watching the crime techs work the scene like they might still find a thread. I knew better. Varna had vanished. But not for good. That night I stood in front of the precinct's command center and gave the order. National alert. Airports, train stations, rental agencies, border crossings. We put his face into every system. I watched the monitors light up with flags and routes. I didn't say anything for a while, just stared at the center screen. At Lana's last image, paused from the unearthed footage. Her mouth about to speak, the words cut off forever. Then I said what I'd been holding. "We'll find him." One of the agents nodded. He won't get far. But I already knew. He'd run before. This time, I wasn't letting go. A week passed after the raid, maybe a little more. We ran his name through every exit point from Los Angeles to Laredo. Nothing. No confirmed sightings, no hotel check-ins, not even a parking ticket. Vincent Varna had gone completely silent. But that kind of silence doesn't hold forever. People who think they're too smart to get caught always leave something behind. I started backtracking the secondary names in the ledgers, grips, camera operators, lighting assistants. Most were dead or retired. A few weren't interested in talking. But a man named Darren Leto, who'd done post-production work on one of Varna's late 70s films, left a voicemail on my desk line. Said he remembered a strange one-off reel they were never allowed to log in the archives. Told me if I was serious about finding where the bodies were buried, I needed to stop thinking like a cop and start thinking like a film tech. I called him back, but the number was disconnected. I drove to the address he left. Apartment above a garage barely held together with duct tape and hope. No one answered the door. Inside the mailbox was a folded envelope with no return address. Just my last name written in block letters. I opened it in the car. There was a photocopy of an invoice, half faded. Film storage unit, leased under a shell company. Location listed as East Hollywood Storage Vault Row, C Locker, 219. The date was from 1981. But the name next to the payment line hadn't faded, Varna, VA. The unit was still there, still paid for month after month by an auto-renewal account tied to an offshore trust. I got the warrant approved by noon and met the tech team after hours. It was one of those basement-level facilities where every hallway looks like the last. The lock took longer to cut than I expected. Inside it smelled like old glue and heat. The walls were lined with metal shelving, canisters, boxes, some unopened mail. One shelf was dedicated to reels, labeled only by number, no titles, no notes. I scanned the barcodes looking for anything that matched the ledger's list. There was one. Reel 246B. I had it bagged and sent straight to the department's media room. I stayed while they threaded it through. Part of me didn't want to see what was on it. The reel started mid-frame static on the edge. Lana was sitting in a chair again. Same robe, same studio lights, but her posture was different. Less posed. She kept glancing off camera. Then her voice came in. "You think I don't know," she said. "You think I'm scared of you." There was no response, but the shot tilted slightly like someone had adjusted the tripod. "I know where the negatives are. I know what you did to the others." She paused, then leaned forward. "I made copies." The screen cut to black. There were 2 more reels like that. Not Lana. Other women. Different years. One of them couldn't have been older than 20. None of them looked comfortable. Every angle was a violation. And the names on the cases, once we matched them to employment records, most had vanished from the industry completely. No film credits after a certain year. A few had filed assault reports that were never prosecuted. One had changed her name, moved to Oregon. We tried reaching out. Carefully, quietly. Some weren't ready. But one woman, Susan Danner, said yes. We met at a neutral site with victim advocates on hand. She spoke calmly, directly. Said she'd been a hairstylist on a set Varna was producing in 1978. She saw things. Heard what they were calling screen tests happening at night. And one day she saw Lana come out of one, white as a sheet, holding a manila envelope under her jacket. She was done, Susan said. Said she was going to walk. I asked if she remembered what happened next. Susan shook her head. She just stopped showing up. Later that week, a former assistant producer named Carlene Marks agreed to sit down with us. She was in her 70s now, still sharp. She'd worked with Varna, closely daily schedules, location calls, catering. She confirmed there was talk in late '78 that Lana had something on him. A tape, photos. She'd started asking questions about contracts, about SAG protections, even about who owned what rights. He was nervous, Carlene said. He stopped having her driven in, started meeting her off-site. Once told me not to ask if I saw his car parked in the lot after dark. She paused, then added, and he hated being told no. Lana told him no. I stayed up that night going back through everything again. Interviews, call sheets, purchase orders, letters. I wasn't chasing a theory anymore. I was assembling a story she never got to finish. Near midnight, I opened the smaller box from the floor again. The one from my grandmother's closet. Tucked beneath the photo and the letter was a receipt I hadn't noticed before. Dated July 10th, 1978. Small camera shop on Ventura Boulevard. 1 roll of film developed. No negatives returned. Just 1 4x6 print. No name on the receipt. But the initials VF were stamped in red ink in the corner. I drove to the address the next morning. The shop had changed hands 3 times, but the clerk behind the counter was old enough to remember. He said they'd kept client backups on microfilm until the early 90s, then transferred everything to storage drives. I asked if the archive still existed. He made a call, said he'd get back to me in a few days. Meanwhile, I ran the initials VF through a private recovery search. Not Vincent Varna. Another name, Valerie Ferris, came up. Bit-part actress. Had done a few commercial spots in the mid-70s. Listed as an extra on one of Varna's unreleased projects. No confirmed contact since 1980. I pulled her file. There was a single handwritten memo from a junior detective dated August 78. Valerie had left the city abruptly. Said she was visiting family. Never came back. No forwarding address. Case never reopened. I flagged it. Ordered a quiet background dig. Something about the timing didn't sit right. That night I sat at the kitchen table with the box between my arms. I reread the letter from Lana. The last paragraph stuck with me. If this is all you get of me, know this: I wanted you. I loved you. You are not their shame. You are mine. And that is the best thing that's ever happened to me. It was the kind of sentence you don't read twice. You just let it sit. I thought about how close she'd come to getting out, to saying it all. She'd been careful, too careful. Maybe she left something behind. At dawn, the clerk from the photo lab called, said he found something. A scanned index dated July 12, 1978, 2 days after the receipt. The tag listed Test Shot LF under protest. 1 print, no digital file. The record was marked held by client request, not for reproduction. There was a corresponding film number, stored off-site. I thanked him and got in the car. As I drove, the light was just starting to catch on the hills, long shadows across the pavement. I didn't know what I'd find on that film, but I knew one thing: whatever Lana left, she meant for someone to find it. And I was finally starting to see the shape of what they'd tried to erase. The off-site vault was deeper than I expected, 2 full levels below the main street, the kind of facility that didn't advertise. Climate-controlled, no signage, just a keypad entry and a narrow staircase that smelled faintly of rubber and dust. I signed in under a dummy case number and followed the clerk through rows of identical units until we reached the reel. Shelf number, catalog tag, and film log all matched. The canister was matte black, no label on the outside. He handed it to me like it was just another errand. I thanked him, kept my pace even as I walked out. Back at the precinct, I didn't tell anyone what I had. I logged it into evidence under restricted access and carried it straight to the media lab. The room was quiet. Lights dimmed to protect the projection wall. I didn't invite the full team, just one trusted tech, someone who wouldn't speak unless asked. I stood while he threaded the reel. When the footage began, the room held its breath. The frame was static at first, then a slow pull focus. Lana stood near a dressing screen, arms crossed over her chest. Her robe hung loose around her shoulders. She looked tired, not worn down, resigned. There was no sound for the first few seconds, just a low hum from the old projector gears. Then her voice came in flat and direct. "You told me this was part of the contract," she said. "You lied." She looked off camera. "I know what you've been doing. You're not going to pin it on me." Her breathing was controlled, her posture still. Not scared, not performing, just finished. The reel cut again, hard splice. Then another shot, this time closer. Same room, different angle. A man's shadow crossed the wall behind her. She didn't flinch. "If I disappear," she said, "check the vault." Then the footage went blank. I didn't move for a while. Neither did the tech. I asked him to duplicate the reel and catalog the raw scan under internal-only access. Then I left the lab, walked out into the hall, and stood there until my breath evened out. I pulled my notes from my back pocket, flipped to the ledger. There it was. Vault C Locker 219. The last confirmed transaction listed under Lana's initials. It wasn't a rumor. She'd known. She'd said it herself. If she disappeared, check the vault. I called the DA, told them we were past suggestion. We had her voice, her image, her words. We weren't chasing a ghost anymore. This was evidence. They agreed. We moved. I coordinated with the U.S. Marshal's office and issued a federal-level warrant for Varna's arrest. We updated the national alerts, expanded the net. His passport was flagged in every international system we had access to. But if he was smart, and I knew he wasn't flying commercial. He was driving, hiding, paying cash. That meant we had to think smaller. I pulled property records on rentals, short-term leases, shell corporations tied to Varna's past associates. One flagged in Monterey County, a cash lease on a small beach cottage. No name listed. But the property manager had made a call, said the man was older, traveled light, never opened the curtains, said he paid for blackout blinds in full upfront, and walked into town only after sunset. Sheriff Clay Boyd agreed to hold until we arrived. The drive up was long. The Pacific kept pace on our left wind rising off the cliffs in quiet bursts. I rode with two marshals, didn't say much, just stared out the window, replaying her voice in my head. Check the vault. When we pulled into the drive, the cottage looked empty. One dim light behind a curtain, no movement. We split off one marshal at the rear one at the north exit. I stepped up behind the Ram Team badge already in hand. The door cracked on the second strike. Inside, Varna was standing near an open suitcase. Shirt half buttoned, passport on the table, phone disassembled. He looked older than I remembered, hollow in the face, thinner. But his eyes were the same. Cold. Watching. Calculating. "Hands behind your head," I said. He didn't argue. The cuffs clicked into place without a word. He glanced at me once as we turned him. Not recognition. Not regret. Just distance. He was booked at the Monterey facility that night and flown back to Los Angeles under escort the following morning. We collected a full DNA sample, buccal swab, saliva, blood. No objection. I waited for the lab results on my own time. Didn't put in a formal request. The technician I trusted logged it under a closed file tag. I submitted my own swab under a placeholder ID. When the call came 3 days later, I picked up before the second ring. "It's a match," he said. "Paternal, 99.9%. I didn't answer right away. "Do you want the report printed?" "No," I said. "Destroy both." "Thank you." I hung up and sat with it. I didn't cry. I didn't pace. I just let it settle. Varna wasn't just Lana's director, or her abuser. He was my father. I carried that truth like I carried the letter, the photo, the necklace. Quiet, heavy, but not surprising. I think part of me had already known. That night I sat in the interview room across from him. Room 3B, same walls, same table, same stale air. He looked smaller in shackles. The chair seemed too big. I laid the photos out in front of him. Lana in the robe, the reel, still the ledger, the vault receipt. Then the DNA report. He looked at each one without comment. "So this is how it ends," he said. I didn't respond. "You think you know?" He went on. "You don't know what it was like back then." I waited. Everyone knew what the game was. They wanted it. All of them. Lana knew how to play it better than anyone. I leaned in slightly. "You were in a relationship with her." His mouth twitched. She got clingy. "Thought I owed her something. Then she showed up with this photo, said she was pregnant. Said she didn't want money just out." He shifted. "But she wasn't going quietly. Threatened to take me down." He looked up. "She had things. Letters, copies, names. I told her to come talk. Set it straight. She came to the house." His voice dropped. She wouldn't stop. I told her to calm down, but she kept yelling. Said she was going public. That's when I grabbed her. She hit her head. It happened fast." He paused. "It wasn't supposed to go that far." "But you buried her anyway," I said. He didn't deny it. "I called someone. I paid people. It was cleaner that way. And the vault," I asked. "You knew it would come back." He didn't answer. I stood up slowly. Let the silence stretch. I turned to the door, then looked back at him one last time. "I hope you rot," I said. Then I paused. "Dad." The word landed like a stone in a still pond. He blinked, face cracking slightly. But by the time the door shut behind me, he was just another man in a jumpsuit. Just another coward with too many chances and not enough conscience. I didn't go home that night. I sat in the parking lot of the forensics office, engine off, fingers tracing the edge of Lana's letter one more time. Somewhere inside me, a knot began to loosen. But I wasn't finished yet. There were more women to find, and a trial coming. I could feel it taking shape finally in full light. We started the excavation just after sunrise. The site had been flagged in a decades-old zoning report, an undeveloped patch of hillside in Glendale, once cleared for a construction project that never materialized. It didn't look like much from the street. A chain-link fence, some overgrowth, an old utility shed leaning sideways. But the aerial scans from county records showed a curious flattening of the terrain, like something had been graded and then covered again. We had the permit. The ground-penetrating radar showed anomalies, dense shapes too symmetrical to be natural. I was there when the backhoe hit the first layer. The soil had a different texture, darker packed. Then came the tarp, then the concrete. Beneath it, 2 industrial crates sealed with rusted bolts, and inside, wrapped in what looked like vintage wardrobe bags, were human remains. 3 sets, each marked with laminated tags, LF, VF, CM. The initials matched employment rosters. All 3 women had been listed as crew on Varna's last independent production. All 3 had disappeared without formal investigation. Now we had their names. And we had their silence broken open by bone and plastic and time. The press was already circling. We kept the scene tight. I called the ME directly. Told her to prioritize DNA extraction, dental confirmation, anything she could pull fast without compromising the chain. She didn't ask questions. The test results came in quicker than I expected. 1 matched Valerie Ferris, 1 matched Cheryl Mendez. The third, it was Lana. Positive ID. Dental match. Age consistent with her last verified medical records. I stood in the corridor when the file was delivered. I didn't open it right away. I just held it. Cold against my hand. The weight of something final. Lana wasn't missing anymore. She was here. She'd been here the whole time. I drove out to my grandmother's house that night, sat on the porch with her and watched the sky go dark. I told her everything. The footage, the letters, the vault. She didn't cry, just took my hand and said, "She fought." That was the only thing that mattered to her, not how it ended, that Lana fought. We brought charges against Varna within 48 hours. 3 counts of murder, 2 of unlawful disposal of human remains, and 1 charge tied to a pattern of predatory abuse. We had the reels. We had the vault. We had his confession piecemeal but usable. He lawyered up, of course, refused further interviews, claimed memory gaps, coercion manipulation, said he was the victim of a smear campaign, but his defense didn't hold. The judge approved the pre-trial motion to admit the footage, said it was too central to the state's case, said the jury had a right to see what he called the context of fear. The courtroom was standing room only on the first day. Reporters, survivors, people from Lana's generation who remembered the posters, the magazine spreads, the roles she never finished. I sat with the DA's office, silent. Not as a detective, not even as her daughter, just as someone who knew the cost of what was about to be said aloud on record in front of the people who once looked away. The prosecution laid it out plainly. Timeline, motive, pattern of control. They played 2 minutes of the reel, no sound. Just Lana sitting in that chair looking straight into the lens. No tears. No drama. Just her. Present. Unmistakable. The jury didn't look away. Some of them wrote notes. Others just stared. When the footage stopped, you could hear the AC kick back on. That's how quiet it got. One by one, the women we'd contacted came forward. Most didn't want their names public, but their testimony was solid. They told the same story that Varna used his power to isolate, manipulate, threaten. That silence was the currency, and fear was the contract. The defense tried to push back, called it a witch hunt, said memories faded, said evidence was circumstantial, but the pattern was undeniable. And then there was Lana's letter, her original copy sealed and dated. The judge allowed it under corroborative grounds. I read it myself aloud, line by line. The courtroom didn't move. When it was over, I stepped outside and called the coroner's office, asked about the final items found in the crate, personal effects. They'd cataloged a small necklace, 2 rings, and a roll of undeveloped film wrapped in wax paper. I asked if the film could still be processed. They said maybe. I gave the okay. It came back 3 days later. A single strip of images. Grainy, slightly warped. But you could see it Lana standing beside a clapboard marked Test Reel 3A. Not afraid. Not broken. Just there. Real. Still fighting. The jury reached a verdict in less than 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. Sentencing was set for the following month. I didn't attend. I didn't need to hear the words again. He'd never walk free. But the system that protected him silently, slowly, piece by piece, that would still be there. And so would I. Because this wasn't just about Lana, or Valerie, or Cheryl. It was about the ones who never got found. The ones whose names never made it onto a ledger. There was still work to do. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't chasing a ghost. I was following her footsteps, and they were leading me somewhere real. The day after the verdict, I visited the DA's office to return the last of my evidence logs. Everything had to be archived now, bagged, labeled, cross-referenced. Case closed. Lana's case number would carry a red tab in the state system marked homicide confirmed. It was the end of something. But it didn't feel like closure. Not really. A body in the ground isn't the same as a voice in the room. I stayed late that night sorting through old case files tied to Varna's past projects. A few still nagged at me names that didn't show up in the crates in the vault or on the old payroll. One in particular stood out. A production assistant named Tara Bloom, 21 when she joined Varna's team. Last seen in 1985. No formal missing persons report. Just a note in the company ledger, resigned, no forwarding address. I didn't buy it. I never had. So I drove to the last known address listed on her file, a low-rise apartment building in Culver City that hadn't aged well. The buzzer didn't work, but the building manager let me in. Said the unit had been vacant for over 30 years, used mostly for storage. He handed me the spare key and told me to lock up when I was done. Inside, it smelled like mildew and cardboard. The windows were taped from the inside and the air was thick with that stale stillness old buildings carry when no one's lived in them for too long. The walls were bare, but in the back room, what might have once been a bedroom was a set of plastic bins stacked in the corner. I knelt down, cracked one open. Inside were film reels. Some commercial stock, some unlabeled. Underneath a folder with handwritten notes shot, lists, camera angles, timestamps. But there was one line that froze me. TB test. Interview. 5.385. Laurel Canyon. That wasn't production documentation. That was intake. I flipped through the pages until I found a Polaroid clipped to the back. Tara. Sitting in front of a white wall. Same posture. Same lighting. It was the same format as Lana's reel. I looked around the room. No camera, no editing setup. Just the bins. But something about the baseboards felt off. I ran my fingers along the edge. One section was newer repainted. I pried it gently. Behind it was a small cavity, a cassette recorder. Old, dust-caked. I brought it back to the precinct, found a player in storage that still worked. I hit play. It started with a low hum, then static, then a voice, hers. My name is Tara Bloom. I was told this would be for casting, but it's not. It's not what they said. Then a pause. He told me not to talk to anyone, said I'd be blacklisted. But I don't care anymore. If something happens to me, his name is Daniel Varna. I stopped the tape. That was enough. I forwarded a copy to the DA's office. They called the next morning, said they'd be reopening a cold case under my lead. Not just Tara's. 3 others surfaced within days, names buried in old press releases, all connected to small projects Varna had worked on before his breakout. Women who never had agents, who never got credits. I tracked each one. Some families were still local. Some had moved. Some had died without ever knowing what happened to their daughters. I met with a sister in Santa Barbara, a cousin in Fresno, and a former roommate who hadn't spoken to anyone in 20 years. They all said the same thing: she was scared she changed, and then she vanished. No funeral, no follow-up. Just gone. Varna had appealed the conviction, of course. Claimed judicial bias, faulty evidence handling fabricated timelines. His lawyer filed the paperwork 2 weeks into sentencing. But the state pushed back hard. The judge denied the motion. No retrial, no early release. He'd spend the rest of his life in a concrete cell. And I'd keep going, because Lana's case was never just hers. It was the pattern that exposed the system. And the system was still running quietly under different names with different directors in different towns. But it hadn't gone anywhere. One night after updating the active case board, I walked the length of the evidence room reading each name, each tag. Lana, Valerie, Cheryl, Tara, others still pending ID. Some we'd never know. I pulled out the original necklace, the one found in Lana's crate, and placed it beside her file. It wasn't much, but it was something. Micah called a few days later, said he'd been thinking about the footage, about the way Lana sat, the way she spoke. She wasn't afraid, he said. She knew what she was doing. I agreed. I asked how his uncle was doing. He said they'd moved back to Tennessee quietly under a different name. Said his uncle still had dreams about the hills. I didn't ask what kind. We both knew they weren't peaceful. Before we hung up, he said, "You did right by her." I said, "Not yet. But I'm trying." That night, I started drafting a petition to fund a public archive, a permanent record for women lost to Hollywood's shadow economy. Not a museum. not a memorial. Just a ledger. A full, honest one, with names, dates, and the truth in black and white. There were no more reels to watch, no more trial dates. But the quiet work remained, filing, cataloging, returning calls, listening when someone said, "I think she knew him." I kept the tape of Tara in my desk, not for evidence, for memory, for weight, for a voice that finally made it out. I still visit the hillside where Lana's car was found, not often, just once a year, usually early January before the sun climbs too high. The road's been rebuilt since the collapse, new guardrails, fresh asphalt. You'd never know what was buried beneath it unless you were looking. But I remember the air that day, the silence, the way the mud had hardened around the frame like a coffin that waited 16 years to be noticed. I don't go there for answers anymore. I just go to remember. Not what happened, but who was lost when no one was watching. Lana was 24 when she disappeared. Same age I was when I started in uniform. She had a voice, a future, a mother who searched until the day she couldn't. Doris never got to see her daughter's name cleared, never saw the conviction, never read the letters Lana wrote. I think about her a lot. The woman who knocked on every door, filed every report, called the station every week for years. They said she was unstable. I call her unrelenting. Without her, we wouldn't have a case. We wouldn't have the tapes. We wouldn't have the truth. Micah sends postcards sometimes. No return address, just a line or two in blocky handwriting. Last one said, "Still sober. Still sorting things out. Thank you." I don't write back. He asked me not to, but I keep every one of them in the same file where I stored the necklace, the Polaroids, the original intake logs. There's something about handwriting, when it's real, it leaves a mark. Nothing digital ever could. There were more victims than we knew. Names still surfacing, stories half erased by time and fear. The archive is growing. Quietly, slowly, but it's there. We get letters now from families, sisters, aunts, women who say, "I think she might have known him." We cross-reference every name. We never promise more than the truth, but sometimes that's more than anyone ever gave them. As for me, I stayed with the department. Not in major crimes. I moved into cold cases last spring. Some days it feels like chasing shadows. Other days something breaks open that was locked for decades. Either way, I keep going, because somewhere someone remembers a girl who didn't come home, and someone else still believes no one cares. I want to prove them wrong, even if it's just one case at a time. Sometimes I hear Lana's voice, not in the recordings, but in the way silence feels different now. There's a weight to knowing, a cost to uncovering things people worked very hard to bury. But there's also something else. A kind of peace that comes from naming what happened, from saying it out loud, from refusing to let it disappear again. This story didn't end in headlines. It ended in paperwork testimony, late nights, and cold coffee. It ended in grief that never quite lets go, but also in truth that couldn't be silenced. Lana Fair wasn't just a footnote in a forgotten scandal. She was someone. And now finally everyone knows that. If this story stayed with you, consider sharing it, so no name gets left behind.